everyone, this is Pallavi and I'm back with the 8th game of the book Chess the Art of Logical Thinking by Neil MacDonald. This game was played between Anand and Kasparov during World Championship in 1995 in New York. The opening plate was Sicilian Defence. Let's start. E4, occupying the center with the pawn while controlling the d5 and f5 square and making way for the queen and bishop to come out. C5, the Sicilian Defence. This pawn move controls the d4 square from the side, opens up the diagonal for the queen, and in future, the c file might come in handy for the queenside attack. Knight f3, developing towards the center, supporting the d4 square so that white can push d4 with knight support. d6, an all-purpose move which stabilizes black's center, opens a diagonal for his queen's bishop, and makes the d7 available for the knight. Most importantly of all, he prepares f6 without having the knight pushed back by e4 to e5. So if black plays knight f6, white cannot play e5 because the pawn is guarding the square. d4. White conquers the d4 square in order to increase the mobility of his minor pieces. C takes d4. Naturally, white's strong center pawn should be eliminated. Knight takes d4. Now the white knight is in a great position to assist any attacking ideas that white might come up with. However, black can take comfort in knowing that white has been stopped from creating a white pawn center. Knight f6. When choosing a move, the most important thing is to make a move that helps your pieces to get into better positions and possibly threaten something right away. Now white has to focus on protecting the e4 pawn. Knight c3. Keeping in mind that knights usually find their best spots on the board earlier than bishops, the knight at c3 is in a great position, protecting the e4 pawn and not easily attacked. On the other hand, defending the e4 with bishop d3 is less effective because the bishop might need to move later, while c4 or e2 would be better for the white bishop. So white played knight c3, black played g6. Instead of advancing the bishop to e7, using moves like e6, then bishop e7, Kasparov opts for a kingside fianchetto. This leads to the well-known dragon variation. While this approach has its merits, let's first acknowledge the risk the world champion is taking to find his own counterplay. He is opening up a vulnerability on g6. The presence of the g6 pawn tempts white to castle on the queen side and initiate an offensive with h4 to h5. His progress in development is being postponed. Getting the bishop on g7 requires two moves, whereas playing bishop e7 takes just one, assuming that the freeing of the e7 square through e7 to e6 holds value on its own. The flexibility of his central pawns is reduced. The move e7 to e6, a crucial element of the common small Sicilian center, becomes problematic in this context. Black's choice of a fianchetto means he can't defend the d6 pawn with bishop e7. Even more unsuitable would be e7 to e5, which is valuable in other setups for controlling d4 and f4. But in this case, it would both confine the bishop and expose d6 vulnerability. Now after g6, Now white played bishop e3. Even though there are downsides mentioned earlier, the black bishop will end up in a great spot on bishop g7, useful for both defense and offense. So white plans to trade it off using moves queen d2 and bishop h6 later on. This is white's boldest way to counter the dragon variation. Essentially an attempt to completely disprove the g6 approach. In the meantime, the bishop supports the d4 knight. Bishop g7. The bishop has the potential to exert enormous pressure as white has traded his d pawn and so cannot use it to plug the a1 h8 diagonal on d4. Queen d2. White carries on with the plan to counter the black bishop by playing bishop to h6 with the support of the queen. This move also keeps the option open for white to castle queenside, setting the scene for a potential pawn attack against the black king. Knight c6. The knight joins in the battle for the center and at the same time rules out bishop h6. Is a blunder in the view of bishop takes h6, queen takes h6, knight takes d4 and winning a piece. So after knight c6, white played f3. This pawn move helps the attacking g2 g4 move and prevents black's knight g4, which would stop bishop h6 and put white's important dark square bishop in danger. So f3 controlling the g4 square. Castle. Kasparov is somewhat moving his king into a risky position by castling, as white is preparing for an attack on the king side. However, black has many active pieces and the situation in the center is uncertain. This makes it challenging for white to gather enough forces for a successful attack on the black king without facing issues in other parts of the board. Bishop c4. To prepare for a kingside attack, white needs to first restrict black's options. After a long castle, instead of bishop c4, after long castle, black might respond with d5, shifting the game's focus to the center. The bishop on c4, white played bishop c4. The bishop on c4 prevents d5 and could aid in future attacks on f7. Black played bishop d7. However, the vulnerable white bishop is also an attractive target due to its unprotected position on an open line. Kasparov plans to unsettle it with rook c8, followed by moving the knight from c6 using a discovered attack. This tactic accelerates his efforts for counterplay in the center. So after bishop d7, white played h4. Finally, white is prepared to initiate his pawn attack on the king side. h5. White already has a target to attack, which is the g6 pawn. Experience has shown that if white gets to play h5, that opens up the h file. It leads to a strong attack. When black plays h5, here, it's like giving a hint for g2 to g4, but when black captures h takes g4, the strong white center starts to weaken. This gives black better chances to launch a counter-attack elsewhere. After h5, bishop b3. White played bishop b3, removing his bishop from the vulnerable c4 square in anticipation of black's next move, rook c8. So after rook c8 having defended his king side to his satisfaction, Kasparov now puts his rook on an excellent open file. Knight takes c6. This exchange helps black control the center more and is usually not a good move for white in the Sicilian defense. Instead, white should have bravely castled on the queen side and faced black's counterplay directly and trusted that the attack on the king side would win. After knight takes c6, black captured with the pawn, b takes c6. Now the c file is unavailable, but black has gained an additional pawn in the center, adding more energy to their position. Additionally, black can target along the b file and take advantage of the placement of the bishop on d3. Now, white played bishop h6. This marks the end of white's planned kingside attack. From this point forward, white will focus solely on defending and stabilizing their position, the center position, which is currently in an uncertain state. c5. The black pawns become more assertive with the potential move c4, which could put the bishop in a difficult situation. Bishop c4. The bishop has little choice but to return to c4 to block the pawn. Queen b6. Here the black queen is deployed to an excellent attacking post with gain of time by attacking the b2 pawn. Bishop takes g7. At least white succeeded in trading black's dark squared bishop, which could have caused trouble along the long diagonal after white's following move. King takes g7. Now, once again, white has to attend to the threat of b2. Kasparov himself suggests that white can bail out with long castle, then queen b4, b3, supporting the bishop on c4. Bishop e6, knight d5. Knight takes d5, e takes d5. Queen takes d2 check, rook takes d2 when the exchange of queens has safeguarded white's position. So after king takes g7, here white played b3. White chooses to maintain the suspense by not exchanging pieces, yet black manages to overcome what was thought to be a defense on the light squares. Bishop e6, a good move from black. The bishop threatens to tear up white's queenside pawns with bishop takes c4. Bishop pawn takes c4 when the c4 pawn would be a constant liability. After bishop e6, white played knight d5. One can sympathize with white's reluctance to strengthen black's control of d5. With bishop takes e6. With bishop takes e6, f takes e6, an exchange which also grants the black rook on f8 an open file. Nevertheless, this was the best chance to keep the balance, as the attempt to play actively just leads to disaster. White played knight d5 and then black captured with the bishop. An unwelcome exchange for white, as the natural response bishop takes d5 allows e6, bishop c4, rook f e8, followed by d5 when black's pawns conquer the center. But white captured with the pawn. So white captured with the pawn. Anand hopes that things will remain quite long enough for him to develop his rooks, but Kasparov of course is in no mood for delays. e5. Now white is faced with a choice. Either allow black to dominate the dark squares in the center or open up lines with the move white makes in the actual game. D takes e6. Now all the pent-up dynamism is in black's fortress bursts forth. d5, attacking the bishop. Kasparov's focus isn't on capturing pawns. Instead, he aims to prevent white from castling, especially on the king side, so that white's king can't escape from the e file. To achieve this, he pushes his center pawns to disturb white's queenside pawns and making that area unsuitable for white's king. This move also stops white from castling kingside after black's next move. So after d5, white played bishop e2. If bishop takes pawn, then rook f d8, pinning the bishop, c4, and then f takes e6. Black wins a piece. So white played bishop e2. Now black played the good move, which is c4. As intended, the black queen now stops white from castling on the king side on g1. Also, the weakening pawn structure on the queen side makes it risky for the white king to escape that way. Now white played a bad move, c3, a fatal loss of time. If long castle, then c takes b3, a takes b3, queen takes b3 is horrible. But rook d1, instead of castling, rook d1, bringing up reinforcements might well have saved the day. White could then facilitate castling kingside with queen d4, followed by castling on the king side. But white played c3. Rook ce8, a good move. The battle will be won down the e file. A magnificent channel for attack for the black's rooks. B takes e4. Instead, e takes f7, then rook takes f7 would just speed up black's plan of doubling the rooks on e file. So white played b takes c4, black played rook takes e6. The signs are ominous for the white king. How can he resist the attack on the e file when almost half his army are absent from the battle on a1 and h1? White played king f1. White moves the king away immediately to prevent rook fe8 from pinning and rook fe8 from pinning the bishop and winning the bishop. Instead, had white played c takes d5, then rook e5. Idea rook fe8. If king f1, then knight takes d5. Idea knight e3, and it's totally winning for black. So white played king f1, black played rook fe8. In this situation, the rooks that are lined up together will be very powerful as they move along the open file. Bishop d3. If rook e1 supporting the bishop, then d takes c4 leaves white completely paralyzed by the pin on the e file. So white played bishop d3, black played d takes c4. And now white played bishop takes c4. Instead of bishop takes c4, if white plays bishop c2, then rook d6, attacking the queen, followed by knight d5 and then knight e3, which is totally winning for black. If queen f2 right now, then queen takes f2 check, king takes queen, rook d2 check, and it wins the bishop. So after d takes c4, white captured bishop takes c4, and now black played knight e4, and white resigned. The black knight attacks the white's queen and at the same time threatens to checkmate. And where is the checkmate? On g3. Knight would be giving check, rook would be controlling the file, and the queen would be controlling this diagonal. So after knight e4, let's say if white had continued with f takes e4, then rook f6 check. King e1, rook takes e4 check, king d1, and then rook takes c4 followed by rook d6. And instead of f takes e4, let's say white is playing queen e1. In that case, rook d6 followed by knight d2 check, winning the queen. Discovered attack. The reason behind this sacrifice might seem complex, but at its core, it's about a black queen and two rooks targeting a white king. With just the protection of a queen, these odds are quite unfavorable, especially with all the lines being opened. And let's say another variation. After queen e1, if f takes e4, then rook f6 check, king a2, and rook takes e4 wins the queen. So principles to keep in mind: occupy the center with pawns, develop your pieces rapidly towards the center, develop knights before bishops. Castle as early as possible. If possible, develop with a threat. If opponent delays castling, break open the central lines to attack the king in the middle. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.